Rev. Paul Solomon. Perhaps the greatest myth being purveyed is that myths are just myths. Micheal Tsarion. We are here to learn to love one another. I do not know what the others are here for. W.H. Auden. During the next 10 years, the human race is destined to finally discover the facts about its true origins and destiny. As part of this discovery, we have to address the overwhelmingly important question of how the phenomena of evil came into the world and into the consciousness of Earth's human inhabitants. This is a question that should be on the mind of every living man and woman. It has been with us for millennia, and it will be with the children of the future if we do not come upon the answer now. We have left the question of evil in the hands of theologians and scientists for too long. This was surely a mistake for, as the casualty statistics clearly testify, the institutions of religion and science have been the worst purveyors of evil that this planet has ever had to endure. After centuries of prevarication and criminality, we can no longer afford to look to these edifices to answer the all-important conundrum of evil. But if we turn from religion and science in this regard, does it mean that we are left in a void? Is there, perhaps, another answer to how the phenomenon of evil came into being? I believe that the answer lies in the ancient records of our forefathers and in the myths and legends of the pre- and post-Diluvian epochs that speak of the visitation of the gods or angels. Several key researchers have stated that these beings were actually extraterrestrial entities. I address who they were, why they came here, and show that after their arrival they established their main headquarters at what we now call Atlantis, and from there, they instigated a hybridization program lasting centuries. Their genetic interference of the Earth races resulted in several hybrid creatures, one of whom I will refer to as Homo Atlantis. Each and every living Adamic human of the last 10 millennia or more is descended from this exceptional being. Every one of us has both human and alien DNA. This is exactly what we have been told in all the world's sundry myths, from the Celtic and Arthurian legends to the Ramayana and Mahabharata. It is also implied by recent scientific findings in the geological record and the biology and genetics of humans, findings which are being sequestered by those with a vested interest in maintaining the present status quo. Its greatest proof, one can argue, lies in the mysteriously destructive behavior that we modern humans have adopted toward our own home planet, the animal kingdom, and the indigenous peoples who have lived in relative harmony with the planet. In my work I intend to show that the descendants of these ancient visitors are still in custodianship of the planet Earth. I will demonstrate that their agendas are not commensurate with the present or future best interests of Adamic mankind. Due to the surge in technological advancement, our once beauteous planet is now on the brink of ecocide, while its political and economic underclasses are subject to a very real new world order. It has been said that there is no excuse for ignorance of the law. However, it is also a truism that ignorance of the lawmakers is no excuse. The end game of the visiting alien race and their descendants is being played out in the present Silicon Age. It swiftly and relentlessly advances while most of us, preoccupied with our domestic and professional roles, have little time or energy to speculate how the multifarious phenomena of our world came into being. Adroit manipulation from those within the echelons of power make quite certain that our attention is rarely focused on the lawmakers and those in control of the economy, military, media, and technology of the world. In this book my intention is to draw the attention of the ordinary person to the reasons why he lives in the disempowered existential state he does, and that while confined to circumscribed, socially vetted roles, he and his fellows will have little ability and less resource to prevent the evil that is evidence everywhere, especially in the so-called corridors of power. I explain why it is that in the back of every mind is the memory of a time when life was harmonious and reverent, when there was no war and little in the way of want, subjugation, or class division. I explain something of the fate of women and why it is that they have suffered the incredible atrocities they have through the post-Diluvian ages. I show that they continue to be collectively punished for a certain crime they committed on this planet approximately 13,000 years ago. I make mention of the significant role that women are to play in the times ahead once they take back the power that was theirs in the days of old. In the epilogue, I continue to detail the endgame which is being played out as you read. The ancient Mayan calendar stipulated the date 2012 as the end of time. It may indeed be the end of the world as we know it. The way things are going, there seems good reason for regarding ourselves on this planet to be well past the 11th hour. In fact, we are veritably at a DEFCON 1 situation, and subconsciously everyone knows it. This book, which first appeared as a short essay, was not written in, or for, levity and is not a work of fiction. It is based on 3 decades of research and was composed in the utmost seriousness. It demands a certain austere attention where personal prejudices and partisan conditionings are temporarily, if not permanently, bracketed. I urgently implore even the most inveterate skeptic to suspend incredulity and contemplate the sublime consequences to himself, his fellows, and to the earth upon which he lives, if the question of evil could once and for all be answered and its worst effects quickly assuaged without further loss of life or welfare. However, being well aware of the state of decay in this age of entertainment and chronic narcissism, I leave to those who cannot suspend their mental and behavioral conditioning the following quote, while dedicating this book to those who now understand or in the near future will come to understand that before law, country, money, pleasure, love or even God, our supernal right and need has always been and remains freedom. For nothing is secret, that shall not be made manifest, neither anything hid, that shall not be known and come abroad. Luke 8:17. Micheal, Tsarion, Seattle, March 2002. Contents Preface equals, Stedoy he that he abs bes oevv Chapter 1. From the End of Heaven. 0.000000E1 Chapter 2. Earth's First Deluge. 00000. Atlantis. 265. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamed of in thy philosophy. Eve, William Shakespeare, Hamlet. Atlantis was not a center of advanced human civilization, but was, rather, the creation of and home to alien beings that colonized the earth. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamed of in thy philosophy. Eve, William Shakespeare, Hamlet. Atlantis was not a center of advanced human civilization, but was, rather, the creation of and home to alien beings that colonized the earth. There are over 30,000 texts from all over the world that speak of this visitation, and these are only those texts that have remained intact throughout the millennia. Youth by Thomas Cole. Atlantis and strange god-men are mentioned in scriptures such as the Bible, the Book of Enoch, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Vedas, the Shastras, the Norse Edda, the Zendavesta, Persian, the Codex Chimalpopoca, Toltec, the Popol Vuh Mayan, the Welsh Triads, the Visuddhimagga, Buddhist, the Annals of the Four Masters, Irish, the Apur and Hermitage Papyri, Egyptian, the Annals of Cuautitlan, Mayan, and others. Atlantis, a name recorded in various permutations by hundreds of cultures, has been called Antilla, Amenti, Aralu, Atala, Epentika, Aslan, Azatlan, Atlantia, Atli, Asgard, Avalon, Arcadia, Arctos, Agtha, Shangri-La, Hyperborea, Tula, Brutus, Yule, Hesperides, Hypersil, to mention a few. It was the original Elysian Fields. The Celts and Gaels called their ancestral homes by a variety of names which have passed down into the fairy folklore of later periods. In their legends we hear of Phineas, Murias, Gorias and Falaise, and of Turtarngire, the land of promise, of Magmel, the plain of happiness, Turfatun, land beneath the sea, of Turnambio, the land of the living, and of Turnan-Og, the land of the young, or of everlasting youth. As H. G. Wells succinctly put it, there is magic in names, and the mightiest among these words of magic is Atlantis. It is as if this vision of a lost culture touched the most hidden thoughts of our soul. Visitation of beings from outside our solar system is not as far-fetched as it might seem and is a possibility greeted by many top scientists, including Albert Einstein. Carl Sagan personally estimated that this planet has been visited at least 5,000 times. In the book, Mankind, Child of the Stars, the authors quote Drive Harrison H. Brown of the California Institute of Technology, who they say estimates that virtually every star in our galaxy has a planetary system, in each of which from 2 or 4 planets might have an Earth-like environment and chemistry that encourages our kind of life to exist. He gives the enormous figure of 100 billion stars with planets in the Milky Way galaxy alone. Professor Hermann Oberth, the father of rocket science, openly believed the planet Earth to be watched by beings from other planets. Indeed, ancient records also confirm that visitations were a relatively common occurrence. Generally, the visitors respected Earth's sovereignty and have conducted their researches without attracting attention or attempting to interfere with Earth's indigenous tribes. Those who have the secrets of and who indulge in space travel maintain non-intervention as an inviolate edict. On the other hand, the Bible and the Book of Enoch, in particular, relate that Earth's sovereignty was violated by one contingent of ancient visitors. These beings were named the Nephilim, those who were cast down. There are many names that have come down to us that were used to describe the visitors. Some of these are Anakim, Revaim, Jinn, Giants, Titans, Fallen Angels, the Watchers, the Els, the Ari Elders, sons of Zadok, sons of Seth, the Uranids, Cyclopes, Prometheans, Olympians, the Elect, Uras, the Elis, Fomorians, the Necromancers, Rayless Ones, Bent Ones, the Dogons, Dagons, the Ana, Amareka, Nagas, the Rakshasas, Dragon Kings, Nadrd, the Brotherhood of the Snake, and the Serpent People. They were also referred to as the Jedi, see Jedi. In the Bible and other scriptures, we read about these fallen angels and underscore their sojourn on earth, for in ancient days, their arrival and activities were not concealed as they are now. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Genesis, chapter 6-8, they come from a far country, from the end of heaven. Isaiah 13:3, who are these that fly in a cloud, as the doves to their windows? Isaiah 9:8, Lucifer's fall by Gustave Doré. The Bible takes the position that the Nephilim were a malign presence and insists that their leaders committed a great sin by interfering with the evolution of humankind, and the great dragon was cast down, the old serpent, he that is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, he was cast down to earth and his angels were cast down with him. Revelation, and it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all that they chose. Genesis, chapter 6-8, there are several key hypotheses and theories that seek to account for the presence of these beings. Let us explore a few of the most provocative yet cogent ones. Go and cut off Tiamat's life, and let the winds convey her blood to secret places. The Enuma Elish, we read from various sources that approximately 50,000 years ago a certain planetary body in our own solar system was mysteriously destroyed. This body has been called Tiamat, Phaeton, Lucifer, Marduk, Malk, Rahab, and even Luna, not connected to the name later given to the moon. It was believed to have existed between Mars and Jupiter and was referred to as the second sun and may have been mistaken as such because its atmosphere was resplendent with reflections of the actual sun. This is not as improbable as it sounds since Venus, the morning star, the second planet from the sun and the third brightest object in the sky, is so bright that it casts a distinct shadow on a moonless night. Around the time of this event, the solar system, and later the Earth, was colonized by extraterrestrial beings who were either attracted to this solar system by that conflagration or upon coming here caused the calamity themselves. Whether the disaster was natural or not, the result was that mankind on Earth experienced total and long-lasting chaos and confusion. The surface of the planet Tiamat consisted mostly of great oceans. Upon its destruction, these vast saline waters entered into the Earth's atmosphere, causing the first of two massive prehistoric deluges and tribulations that mankind would experience. It is thought that the alien invaders took full advantage of this predicament and moved in to bring about colonization. They met no resistance from the disoriented and weakened inhabitants of the Earth who believed their visitors were powerful gods. Some theorists, like the energetic Erich von Däniken, have also determined that there was a great intergalactic war between two, or possibly more, extraterrestrial forces in a neighboring galaxy or solar system. The result of this titanic war had enormous consequences for the Earth because, it is postulated, the losers on being pursued into our system pretended to take refuge on Tiamat. They even erected a makeshift radar-type station there to decoy their pursuers. However, the defeated ones had really taken refuge on planet Earth, not on Tiamat. Upon their arrival, they almost immediately went underground into existing caverns that through scans of the planet they knew existed. They also descended into other caverns that they themselves cut out of the living rock. There were at least 5 entire continents on Earth in primeval times called Appalachia, Tyrrhenia, Beringia, Fennoscandia, and Oceania. Our present continents are remnants of these. Beneath them were literally thousands of miles of subterranean passages, caverns, and refuges. Some of these remain today and experts know that many of them were not made naturally. Many of our quaint myths and tales, like those of dwarves, trolls, elves, the little people and the Scandinavian king under the mountain, for example, concern these subterranean worlds. Almost all the Native American Indian tribes speak of their original residence beneath the surface of the Earth. The pursuers, the victors of the war in the heavens, erroneously thinking that their enemies were on Tiamat, utterly annihilated it. This horrific act and its subsequent consequences were witnessed and recorded, and behold, a star fell from heaven. And the children of the earth began to tremble and quake before them and to flee from them. And again I saw how they began to gore each other and to devour each other, and the earth began to cry aloud. Book of Enoch, I saw in a vision how the heavens collapsed. And when it fell to earth I saw how the earth was swallowed up in a great abyss. And I lifted up my voice to cry aloud, and said, the earth is destroyed. Book of Enoch, and in those days Noah saw the earth that it had sunk down and its destruction was nigh. And he arose from thence and went to the end of the earth and cried aloud to his grandfather Enoch, and Noah said bitterly, 3 times, Hear me, hear me, hear me. And I, Enoch, said unto him, Tell me what it is that is falling upon the earth, that it is in such evil plight and shaken. Book of Enoch. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as if it were a lamp. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, and many men died of the water, because they were made bitter. Rev 8791. And the fourth angel sounded, and a third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened. Rev 8791. And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth. Rev 8791. For this they are willingly ignorant of. The world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. 2 Peter 3:5. Celtic records also speak of the deluge. I have been in the bark of Dylan, son of the wave, when the waters rose as lances, falling down from the skies, into the exposed abyss. Book of Taliesin. The Indians of Lake Missoula, Washington, have in their midst the following account. One summer morning the people were startled by a rumbling and a shaking of the earth. Then the sun was blotted out. Terrified people ran to the hills to get away from the pounding water. Then a rain of ashes began to fall. It fell for several weeks. The Ute Indians relate, the sun was shivered into 1,000 fragments, which fell to earth, causing a general conflagration. Then Tawats fled before the destruction he had wrought, and as he fled, the burning earth consumed his feet, legs, body, hands and arms. Until at last, swollen with heat, the eyes of the god burst and tears gushed forth in a flood which spread over the earth and extinguished the fire. The Navajos, Coyoteros and Pueblos Indians have similar reports. In this vein, their only food was meat, for all kinds of game were closed up with them. Then the men and animals began to come up from their caves, and their coming up required several days. The earth was at this time very small, and the light as scanty as it had been down below, for there was as yet no heaven, nor sun, nor moon, nor stars. From Teutonic legends. Earth sinks in the sea, the sun turns black, cast down from heaven are the hot stars, fumes reek, into flames burst, the sky itself is scorched with fire. From maverick catastrophist and researcher Comins Beaumont, we read, The flood, to the world generally a vague and nebulous tradition, really conceals the most appalling visitation, and its ravages in the British Isles and Scandinavian lands may be retraced to more considerable extent by the effects of what geologists term the drift age. It was no mere ice drift. It was sudden and terribly swift and violent. It permanently affected the world's climate towards greater extremes of cold and damp, lengthened the solar year by enlarging the world's orbit. It shaped world history by compelling the flight of survivors to other less inhospitable climes, and led in considerable degree to the dispersion of the Aryans. It inundated the British Isles for a period to a great extent except the higher lands. It was the drowning of Atlantis. The flood immortalizes the collision of a fallen planet, later termed Satan, actually a cometary body, with our Earth. Comins Beaumont, riddle of prehistoric Britain. The debris from Tiamat's destruction has become the asteroid belt with its own orbit. When it nears the Roche limit of this planet, the debris occasionally re-enters the atmosphere, falling to the surface. As researchers like Charles Fort have so splendidly collated, our Earth has seen strange rains of fish and frogs, oil and stone, hail and ice descending from the skies. What has been kept back is the fact that these anomalies are really the remains of an entire planet, that of Tiamat. The waters of its great oceans became frozen in space. When they entered our atmosphere, they liquefied, depositing their often lived contents on the surface of Earth to the perplexity and bemusement of witnesses. When it was written in the book of Revelation that the battle of Armageddon would be fought in the air, it seems to refer to either the ramifications of the destruction of a second luminary in our own solar system, or to the believable intergalactic war that strayed also into our backyard. See The Lost Zodiac and the works of Erich von Daniken, Immanuel Velikovsky, William Bramley, David Hatcher Childress, and J. Hurtak. As conjectured, the ensuing war of the air was obviously seen from the Earth by its then indigenous inhabitants. Moreover, the reconnaissance missions of the fallen gods and their strange chariots were also witnessed and recorded. These records remain today, though many believe them to be mere fairy tales. More than 30,000 written documents from all over the world tell of advanced beings who either came to Earth or who were already living on Earth. Jack Beringer, Past Shock. Now as I looked upon the living creatures, I saw 4 wings upon the ground, one by each of the living creatures, with their 4 faces. The appearance of the wheels and their composition was like the color of shiny amber, and all 4 wings had one likeness, and their composition was like a wheel in the middle of a wheel. Book of Ezekiel. Let's consider just a few of the strange references from the pages of the Bible Testaments, and think to ourselves whether there is some other tale going on other than that which has been expounded from the pulpit. Then Eve looked up to heaven and saw a shining chariot come drawn by 4 gleaming angels whose glory no one born of woman could express nor look on their face, and angels went before the chariot. Book of Ezekiel. And it came to pass that when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace, and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces. Genesis 15:17. And when the living creatures went, the wheels went by them, and when the living creatures were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up. Ezekiel 1:19. Whithersoever the Spirit was to go they went, thither was their spirit to go, and the wheels were lifted up over against them, for the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. Ezekiel 1:20. And the pillar of the cloud went from before their face, and stood behind them. Exodus 4:19. His going forth is from the end of the heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it, and there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. Nehemiah 18:10. And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it, and out of the midst thereof as the color of amber out of the midst of the fire. Ezekiel 4:5. And it came to pass, as Moses entered into the tabernacle, the cloudy pillar descended, and stood at the door of the tabernacle, and the Lord talked with Moses. And all the people saw the cloudy pillar stand at the tabernacle door, and all the people rose up and worshipped, every man in his tent door. Exodus 33:9. Then they willingly received him into the ship, and immediately the ship was at the land whither they went. John 6:21. And from the ancient Aryans and Hindus he boarded the aerial vehicle with Kara, which was decorated with jewels and the faces of demons, and it moved with noise resembling the sonorous clouds. So Ravana and Marika boarded the aerial vehicle resembling a palace, Vimana, from that hermitage. Then the demoness brought the Puspaka aerial vehicle and placed Sita on it by bringing her from the Ashoka forest, and she was made to see the battlefield with Trijata. This aerial vehicle marked with swan soared into the sky with loud noise. An aerial chariot, the Pushpaka, conveys many people to the capital of Ayodhya. The sky is full of stupendous flying machines, dark as night, but picked out by lights with a yellowish glare. Mahavira of Bhavabhuti, an 8th century Jain text, speaking of earlier records, now Veda's chariot's greatness. Breaking goes it, and thunderous is its noise, to heaven it touches, makes light lurid a red fiery glare, and whirls dust upon the earth. The airplane occupied by Salva was very mysterious. It was so extraordinary that sometimes many airplanes would appear to be in the sky, and sometimes there were apparently none. Sometimes the plane was visible and sometimes not visible, and the warriors of the Yadu dynasty were puzzled about the whereabouts of the peculiar airplane. Sometimes they would see the airplane on the ground, sometimes flying in the sky, sometimes resting on the peak of a hill, and sometimes floating on the water. The wonderful airplane flew in the sky like a whirling firebrand. It was not steady even for a moment. The Mahabharata, the head of Sanskrit at the University of Madras, Drive. V. Raghavan writes, 50 years of researching this ancient works convinces me that there are living beings on other planets, and that they visited Earth as far back as 4000 BC. There is just a mass of fascinating information about flying machines, even fantastic science fiction weapons, that can be found in translations of the Vedas, Indian epics, and other ancient Sanskrit texts. Zechariah Sitchin and others of his ken are of the opinion that the losers in this cosmic Armageddon, that is, the visitors, were generally moral and good, and that their arrival here was generally a good thing for the earth. This writer finds it difficult to accept this theory in its entirety. It is just as reasonable to assume as the ancient texts advocate that these visitors, being so remorselessly pursued, were immoral, negative beings who had perhaps contributed to the corruption of their own home planet and who are finally being expunged. There is a great deal of information coming out of the ancient legends that convinces this writer that the visitors, for all their intellectual acumen and technological expertise, were morally corrupt, without spiritual sensible ties of any kind. These alien, criminal renegades took their cover on Earth, met with the indigenous tribes, were considered gods, and took full advantage of the relative credulity of their hosts. Having no love for the people of Earth, they almost immediately sought to enslave them. It is our opinion that they were successful, and that no one can have a real grasp of the history and progress of humankind without taking into consideration the idea of alien colonization. Many ancient legends speak of this visitation. For instance, the Hindu scripture, Srimad Bhagavatam, relates the coming of a demon race which invaded the 3 planetary systems. One of the epithets given to the visitors was the ant people, from the fact that they had the habit of mining and burrowing underground and living there in complex colonies. This was a practice that availed perfect concealment, as these renegades knew that it was absolutely imperative that they were not traced to this planet and that their previous hosts believed them utterly destroyed. The Celtic legends, and even the Bible, declare that the Nephilim, fallen angels, took refuge under water in their crafts. No craft they knew, with woven brick and jointed beam to pile the sunward porch, but in the dark earth burrowed and housed like sunless ants in sunless caves. Aeschylus, and the king said to her, Be not afraid, for what sawest thou? And the woman said unto Saul, I saw gods ascending out of the earth. I Samuel 28:13, Dead things are formed from under the water, and the inhabitants thereof. Job 12:5. With this kind of phenomena occurring, we can perhaps make sense of one of the most enigmatic edicts from the Yahwistic commandments: You shalt not make for yourself a graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is under the water of the earth. Exodus 24. In Edward Bulwer-Lytton's book, The Coming Race, he describes the existence of advanced beings living in tunnels and caverns beneath the surface of the earth. He refers to these beings as the Ana, saying they were forced below because of earth changes and a flood which destroyed their civilization thousands of years before the biblical cataclysm. In David Icke's Children of the Matrix, we read, 36 underground cities have been discovered in Cappadocia so far, and some are huge complexes going down 8 levels. The ventilation systems are so efficient that even 8 floors down the air is still fresh. 30 vast underground cities and tunnel complexes have also been found near Derinkuya in Turkey. The Hopi Indians speak of an underground world called Sapapuni where they say their tribe originated. Interestingly, G. Warren Shufelt discovered the underground tunnels beneath Los Angeles, which the Hopi Indians had for centuries believed were inhabited by a lizard race over 5,000 years before. In his book Agartha, Robert E. Dickoff tells of a Tibetan monk who learned that an alliance of reptilians and human black magicians were causing chaos and destruction in the surface societies by projecting malevolent energy fields into people's minds using that which we call witchcraft, the manipulation of energy. Dickoff says that the monk led 400 warrior monks into the caverns to do battle with this serpent cult. Scholar and researcher J.J. Hurtak declares, In our research in Africa, the Far East and the mountains of South America, we have come across statuary of very grotesque beings, who according to the Indian and shamanistic tradition, went into the earth at the time of a great cataclysm. The Apache Indians tell stories of tunnels between their lands and the city of Tiahuanaco and claim that their ancestors traveled for years by this route. The Indian chiefs also assured that the tunnels were carved out by rays that destroy the living rock, and that their creators were beings who live near the stars. From Uriel's Machine by Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas, in Celtic mythology, the Tuatha De Danann, a powerful tribe of druid warriors, descended into the underworld through what are called the Sithas. We could fill volumes with the references of alien visitation in connection with the hollow earth. These accounts of the ancients have been dismissed for centuries and often ridiculed and misunderstood. For instance, the visitors are sometimes described to be fantastic in aspect, sometimes as having 2 heads or faces. But this description is comprehensible when we realize that it refers to a face inside a space helmet, which appeared to our ancestors as 2 faces or heads. The Men of Brass or Bronze was also a title used for the visitors, possibly due to the metallic suits they wore. They also seem to have communicated in strange voices, many tongues. Can this not also be explained in practical terms? Can the references about the fallen angels in the Old Testament, Book of Enoch, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, not be based on actual fact? The Nephilim had to begin calibrations of the earth in relation to the neighboring planets and stars almost immediately after ascent from their subterranean havens. Although they were in no immediate hurry, they believed they could leave the planet whenever they desired. Earth was certainly not their home, but it was better than nothing in an emergency. But because they had arrived suddenly and not by choice, they were in a predicament as to where they were in celestial terms and in a quandary about where to go in the future. The Nephilim, with the help of the Neanderthal race, constructed and erected stone monuments and giant earth calendars on the plains for their astronomers to engage in calculations to orient themselves correctly in this new wing of the galaxy. There is some evidence to indicate that the Nephilim did not leave Earth immediately because they feared that the solar system after the destruction of Tiamat was magnetically unstable to the extent of preventing them from flying out and navigating easily. One does not drive their car through a volcano or earthquake by choice. The risk was too great for a time. They also did not know if their enemies were still watching for them or whether they had set some kind of warning alarm system that would signal the Nephilim's presence. The Nephilim established their main headquarters, Atlantis, on the continent of Appalachia. From this center they would corral and experiment on the indigenous Earth inhabitants taken from cultures and tribes that were shaken asunder by the recent celestial catastrophe. Nearly all the native cultures of the earth record the visitation of strange and advanced individuals possessed of miraculous powers. An interesting anecdote which repeats throughout the ancient records and accounts is that the beings who visited the various countries were never numerically many. The records say that they appeared in groups of 3 or 4 members. The fact that the visitors were of such a small number is suggestive that they were actually contingents of a larger mass centered elsewhere, that they were on reconnaissance missions, and that were data gatherers and ambassadors sent out to the corners of the globe. The strangers could knit bones, provided food, took counsel, gave magnificent gifts, spoke in strange tongues, were intensely intelligent, and pointed to distant galaxies when asked about their origins. Many texts record that some of the visitors were also extremely vengeful when wronged. And they were after mineral wealth and human labor. See the works of David Hatcher Childress. Chapter 3 Old World Disorder. After Atlantis was constructed, the alien visitors sought to establish the new order over their minions, the erstwhile natural and nature-loving inhabitants of the earth. Their common rationale was the same as John Milton's fictional archangelic renegade, Lucifer: better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Paradise Lost. One of the ways in which they sought to accomplish their goal involved biogenetic interference with and alteration of the indigenous earth inhabitants. Such a practice was known to be a cardinal sin, and so, originally, normal sexual intercourse was attempted with unsatisfactory results, and it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all that they chose. Genesis 6-8. And the daughters of Cain with whom the angels had companied conceived, but they were unable to bring forth their children, and they died. And of the children who were in their wombs some died, and some came forth. Having split open the bellies of their mothers, they came forth by their navels. The Ethiopian Kebra Nagast. Extraterrestrials visit neighboring planets and galaxies, but they rarely interfere with the evolution of the species that they find there. This edict the Nephilim disregarded. And they knew that there would be a penalty for their heinous actions. In the Book of Enoch, we read of the Nephilim leader, called Samjaza, Anzal, Belial, Enlil, etc. Speaking of the deed to his 200 brethren, and then Samjaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. Individuals were selected from various tribes and lured to Atlantis, perhaps under the pretext of being chosen and specially favored. As part of other nefarious stratagems, we find that large sections of certain tribes were lured and corralled in Atlantis. It may be noted that though it is now common, it is not normal for mankind to congregate and live in cities. This is entirely artificial. The design of the continent of Atlantis was created in such a way as to make possible the segregation of populations while the surveys and researches were ongoing. See Planet of the Apes. The Earth's natural pre-visitation caretakers may have been the Neanderthals, Cro-Magnon, or even the Indus peoples. Though these peoples have always been put before us as backward and dull-witted, the paleoarchaeologists are finding evidence that contradicts these commonly held assumptions. Nearly all the theories that have perpetuated this conjecture are now antiquated and unsustainable. It is known, however, that these Neanderthals suddenly vanished from the Earth for no known reason. Authors Max H. Flint and Otto O. Binder wrote in their book, Mankind, Child of the Stars, Cro-Magnon man appeared with a mysteriously improved skeletal characteristics and with a cranial capacity that is amazingly in excess by 100 cubic centimeters of that of modern man. A similarly large degree of brain expansion occurred in absolutely no other species. On Earth in all the ages of the past, not has any genus shown evidence of brain mutation of a comparable magnitude since antiquity. Those ever so lucky persons who were chosen for hybridization by the Nephilim inherited the alien DNA and became morally corrupt. Some of these persons were sent back into their tribes as kings possessed of powerful magic and wealth. Henceforth, bloodline would be extremely important to the monarchs of the earth. Records were kept in Atlantis of all their engineered slaves, and from then onwards, the progeny of those persons would be favored and protected. Some writers contend that after hybridization the genetically manipulated individuals had very extended lifetimes and could maintain the same form for many hundreds of years. In prehistory, most tribes were predominantly of the matriarchal type, which is why all Bronze Age villages were circular in design. Even the later concept of the Arthurian Round Table indicates the idea that no one man is head and that kinship, arises from the camaraderie and collaboration of all, not the ego-driven, autocratic travesties of later periods. In many cultures the dead warriors were buried in circular cairns or mounds called sithas, pronounced she. This word connotes female breast, and the burial chambers actually look like such from outside. The implication is that the dead are placed again inside the womb, the breast, the symbols of renewed life. The Egyptians used to place their dead within sarcophagi that were symbols of the female body. In fact, the interior of the lid of the sarcophagus had the image of the night sky as the overarching body of the mother goddess Nuth. Clearly, the monarchies of any age have been responsible for atrocious crimes. And yet, the monarchs themselves claim rulership by divine right. James VI of Scotland became James I of England and was the main proponent of this. The origins of the sanctity of kings goes back to pre-Diluvian times, however. The state of monarchy is the most supreme thing upon earth, for kings are not only God's lieutenants upon earth and sit upon God's throne, but even by God himself are called gods. And so their power after a certain relation compared to divine power. For if you will consider the attributes to God, you shall see how they agree in the person of a king. To dispute what God does is blasphemy. So it is sedition in subjects to dispute what a king may do in the height of his power. I would not have you meddle with such ancient rights of mine as I have received from my predecessors. James VI, King of Scotland and England. On Atlantis, the segregated or imprisoned groups had their biology studied and experiments were continued for centuries. Along with their supersensory skills, the Nephilim also possessed great knowledge of biology, crystallography, organic computing, and robotics, etc. Such science cultures like the Sumerian, Indo-Aryan and Egyptian have alphabets, mathematical concepts, and symbolic cosmologies, all just appearing fully formed without record of the normal antecedent and cumulatory stratifications that must attend these achievements. Here are some examples of the quandaries that beset the scholars and academes. Sir Leonard Woolley in his Ur of the Chaldees wrote, "There is nothing to show to what race the first inhabitants of Mesopotamia belonged. At a date which we cannot fix, people of a new race made their way into the valley, coming whence we do not know." And Professor W. B. Emery wrote in his Archaic Egypt the following: "At approximately 3,400 years BC a great change took place in Egypt and the country passed rapidly from a state of advanced Neolithic culture to two well-organized monarchies. At the same time writing appears. Monumental architecture and the arts and crafts developed to an astonishing degree. There appears to be little or no background to these fundamental developments." In Colin Renfrew's Before Civilization, the following passage: "After hybridization, certain chosen ones from the Earthmen were also brought into the inner circles of the visitors. This would have been done for purely pragmatic reasons. Some of those genetically modified were sent back to their societies and exalted as priests, elders, or even kings. They were lackeys of the malign warlocks of Atlantis who really ruled from behind the thrones, keeping in touch with their minions through the use of powerful crystal-seeing stones. In Our Haunted Planet by John, archaeologists all over the world have realized that much of prehistory as written in the existing textbooks is inadequate, some of it quite simply wrong. It has been suggested that the changes now at work in prehistory herald the shift to a new paradigm, made necessary by the collapse of the first paradigm." Micheal, we read, "According to the traditions of many isolated peoples, the first great emperors in Asia were god kings who came down from the sky, displayed amazing superhuman abilities, and took over. There was a veritable worldwide epidemic of these god kings between 5000 and 1000 BC. They were also capable of telepathic communications. Their close worldwide cooperation has been maintained by instantaneous intercommunication by telepathy which is taught them. Iklau Kushana, the ultimate frontier. It is from these times that we have the concept of initiation into the so-named mysteries, which were always some kind of sequestered knowledge of enormous portent that only a few special severely tested persons could know about. Later, it was thought, after mankind defied the alien despots, some of these initiation processes were maintained for the keeping of the knowledge sacred and out of their hands." 18. These false envoys and overlords imposed taxation, enforced slavery and sacrifice, and generally lived off the labor of the hybrid Earth people. The indigenous people of Earth did not rebel immediately against these foreign oppressors. Strong assertive leaders, it seems, were needed after the destruction of Tiamat and the subsequent terrestrial calamities. The false ones promised consolidation, order, safety, and privilege. They instigated hierarchic control, the division of labor, merit-oriented advance, and induced conditions that inevitably lead to man's disconnection from nature. Necessity fostered the worst of tyrannies to descend on prehistoric humanity. Humankind would not just create or accept such structures as a matter of course. It takes extraordinary circumstances for the millennia-old, symbiotic umbilical connection to the planet of origin and to the universal order to be occluded, and for humankind's chthonic sensibility and natural love to become sublimated and directed away from its prime source and object into purely pragmatic power relations. It is logical to assume that these incongruent and deviant patterns have not arisen merely as a matter of course, as a consequence of the erstwhile organic evolution of our species, as modern intellectuals advocate. We feel that it is more consistent with the facts to posit some external interference. And there are many myths, legends, and sagas that conceal, behind the wide and complex panoply of euphemisms and allegories, allusions to this very predicament. From the presence of the aliens and from their overt dominion, we have the creation of competitive sports, tests of prowess, and the exaltation of the muscular skills. There also came the pursuit of aggressive warfare and the conquest of other tribes and nations. There came the division of people into superior and inferior groups. We must ask, are such habits intrinsic to Earth humans? Are they productive? Would they not be more commensurate with the agenda of those bent on weakening the populations of the Earth, on embroiling them in futile and destructive wars, on arousing aggressive instincts, which cause so much systemic and social despair? From their presence came the reality of ritual murder and human sacrifice to further instill fear and provide sustenance to the gods of the underworld night sky. This accounts partly for why once great and benign civilizations, peaceful and respectful of nature, suddenly descend into debauchery and civil strife. In the legends of the Tahoe, California, Indians, for instance, we read of the strife. There was a time when their tribe possessed the whole earth and were strong and numerous and rich, but a day came when a people rose up stronger than they and defeated and enslaved them. Afterward the Great Spirit sent an immense wave across the continent from the sea, and this wave engulfed both the oppressors and the oppressed, all but a very small remnant. The records of hundreds of cultures lead us to the conclusion that their eventual decline and fall was indeed due to external interference. The alien invaders and their lackeys also instilled the idea, now so all-pervasive, that nature was threatening and antithetical to humankind, something to be abused and possessed. This instinct is certainly not natural to terrestrial humans but would be consistent with the outlook of those not from this planet. It is extremely unlikely that such a pernicious philosophy could originate from within humankind. For reasons that should now be apparent, historians have suppressed most of the evidence of the pre-Diluvian matriarchies. All the various tenets of post-Diluvian religion have their roots in the lexicons of those bent on mind control and the enslavement of humankind. The utter perversity of their natures could not be better revealed than by the philosophical perusal of these so-called religious credos. A study of Christian history discloses the portentous fact that the concept of the malignancy of matter, coming into the movement from Hinduism through Zoroastrianism, became an influence overwhelmingly dominating the theology and the ethic. It bred the monstrous cult of asceticism, whose driving motivation was the idea that the instincts of the flesh must be crushed down in the interests of the spirit. The tragic consequences of this staggering default of insight are incalculable, but in all conscience overwhelming to any intelligence that discerns it. It lay the Christian mind open to the obsession of a psychological influence that has been nothing less than devastating to sanity, inflicting upon the psyche a trauma that has produced morbidity and crushed to a degree the natural instinct for human happiness. Alvin Boyd Kuhn, The Ultimate Canon of Knowledge. From these malefactors comes the notion of the removed God, a distant, immaterial and punitive demiurge that requires man to repress natural instincts and live in constant guilt. From them also comes the pernicious concept of a fallen God who tempts the unwary and leads one into everlasting perdition. They also instilled the fallacy that women are lower in ontological status than men and that they are to be distrusted and kept in subordinate positions. Polygamy, another practice pervasive in certain ancient societies, was again based on the need for these biologically superior entities to reproduce their kind as fast as was possible. Keeping women in submissive positions and having them uneducated mitigated against them ever wondering why they were being used as incubators. Tribes who are in true harmony with nature and who desire to remain so are instinctively repulsed by the overpopulation of the earth. See the works of Professor L.A. Waddell. Rebellion broke out on Atlantis, possibly due to a falling out between factions of the oppressors, with one group as a result taking sides with the humans. Some say that a small group of alien priests took pity on the earth and sought to restore the natural rule, or close to the original condition. See David Wood's Genesis, a first book of Revelation. Others contend that it occurred due to the intervention of galactic forces that sought to eradicate the bent ones from this planet, or at least restrict their corrupting operations. Whatever the actual truth, it appears the rebels decided that it would be futile to go into the individual colonies throughout the earth to depose the Atlantean demigods. Better to strike at the root of the problem, Atlantis itself. Many world myths and legends speak of wars between the giants. The stories have uncanny similarities and may refer to this attempt of Earth inhabitants to eradicate strange demonic visitors. It has been noted, for instance, that the Mahabharata in India, the Trojan Wars and the Gaelic Wars in Ireland all occurred relatively simultaneously, see Immanuel Velikovsky. In the story of Beowulf, one of the first romances of the later Anglo-Saxon period, we again find the story of demonic forces that live in the wild places and prey off the people. The romances have the same refrain wherever they are found. All speak of the banished hybrids, living on islands or under the earth. Is this a mere story that is put before us? Was it all just creative license? Grendel, this monster grim was called, March River Mighty, in moorland living, in fen and fastness, fief of the giants. The hapless wight a while had kept since the Creator his exile doomed. On kin of Cain was the killing avenged by sovereign God for slaughtered Abel. Ill fared his feud, and far was he driven, for the slaughter's sake, from sight of men. Of Cain awoke all that woeful breed, Edens and elves and evil spirits, as well as the giants that warred with God weary while, but their wage was paid them. Beowulf Prelude, Episode 1. On Atlantis, the peoples of the sequestered colonies of original Earth inhabitants, forewarned of this coming rebellion, would have been prepared to vacate the precincts and overthrow the tyrannical technocratic elites. Knowledge, instruments, and books were rescued and preserved. The freed persons moved on to the waters in ships and with the use of certain devices attempted to relocate their respective lands. Some that were not able to do this settled on lands that were unfamiliar. This is clearly the case with the Gaels. In fact, it is recorded that they came to Ireland from 4 sacred islands that were destroyed because the rulers were corrupt. In Irish myth, we read of the successive waves of colonists, each declaring that, although in opposition politically, they were kindred to those already in situ. The story of the migrations has survived down to modern times and been retold in masterworks of fiction and non-fiction. See Charles Squire, Jim Fitzpatrick, Morgan Llewellyn, Ursula Le Guin, Frank Herbert, and Robert Holdstock. Many of the people who left Atlantis after the overthrow were themselves genetically altered and possessed what was called magical powers, which ought all that were. Witness to them. The extraterrestrial priests who sided with the Earth people set themselves up as kings or more likely as the advisors of the indigenous but magically endowed kings. The Arthurian legends speak of such beings, for instance, Merlin. In other Celtic myths, we have Taliesin, Emergen, Tuan Brez, Bor, Dians Tindic, Balathin Lug, Nuada, Colhulain, Ossian, Finmac Cumail, and a host of others. In these and other stories, the advisor, leader, or king has pronounced strength, wisdom, clairvoyance, beauty, and long life, which are all the possible results of genetic modification. One may also recall the strange attributes of the Russian warlock, Grigory Rasputin, enigmatic occult advisor to the Romanov dynasty of the IGTH century. Grigory is a Greek word for fallen angel. See Alex de Jong's Rasputin. In many cases, he also possessed a familiar weapon or talisman with magical properties. Magic was the word used for high technologies not understood by the witnesses of the day. If a machine works perfectly, the results are like magic. The Celtic sagas are full of mention of magical weapons and treasures. One of the latter was the sacred stone of Fall that was placed under the throne of the king in Tara, Drumcain or Hill of the Serpents. This stone, it was said, would cry out if a false one sat to be crowned. We might ask what mystery is secreted in this myth. The word fall actually means stone and is the root of the word phallic. The stone of fall is, therefore, the stone of stones, probably a powerful crystal that would indicate if a person was genetically altered in some way. This stone, like the lingam of the Hindus, was believed to be connected to the planet Saturn for whom the earthly kings ruled. In folklore, there are cover references to genetic manipulation. Consider the entity called a changeling. Was this an alien substitute for a human infant? Moreover, in prehistoric times, it was impossible for anyone to rule in Ireland if they were blemished, a rule that was assiduously honored. Could blemish be a reference to artificial alteration? The world's folklore is replete with warnings about witches who can be identified as evil because of their strange markings or deformities. Though later mundane history tells of much abuse of such lore, it is reasonable to assume that they were founded on some factuality. This is also the reason why there is the emphasis on purity of the bloodline when it comes to kingship. This purity was essential to both sides, each having a vested interest in having only their own lineage enthroned. Innumerable rituals associated with kingship date from this. And in certain tribes there is the custom of being bonded by blood. In such ceremonies, a person who has come to love and respect another, lets physical blood and literally presses this to that of his fellow who has likewise let free their blood. Is this just another meaningless heathen ritual? Does this not mean that kindredness has to do with the same blood, not dissimilar blood? And what are we to make of the Persian tale of the genie and the bottle? Could these tales not also conceal facts about laboratories, evil wizards, hybridization, and genetic manipulation? Not all the returning natives freed from Atlantis found it easy to gain access to their kingdoms or lands or to take control in their enslaved provinces. During the reign of the alien tyrants, the morale of the enslaved was reduced, while superstition and suspicion were rampant. When it was learned that usurpation had occurred on Atlantis, ruling despots feared for themselves and for their exposure and expulsion. Through the adroit use of manipulation and propaganda, they turned the people against the newcomers, often engaging them in battle. In this endeavor the use of betrayers was especially useful. They spread false rumors that the newcomers were not returning saviors, but dangerous sorcerers who would steal the children and bring disease, all things that the tyrant masters were themselves engaged in. All over the world, we have then one of two possible outcomes. Either the free ones triumph, banishing, imprisoning, or killing the evil ones, or alternatively, the evil ones prevail to continue cruel, inhumanitarian regimes. In this latter scenario, the freed Atlanteans would be killed, betrayed, or imprisoned. They, like the less endowed natives, would live out lives of poverty and servitude. This is the situation that we find in evidence all over the globe coming down into historical times, see the saga of Robin Hood. And since, for the most part, the evil ones remained in power, they had the official histories fabricated to aggrandize themselves and to perpetuate the status quo. Their priestly allies were especially complicit in this endeavor. Their mythographers pushed back in time the dates of the arrival of their masters by hundreds of thousands of years, making it impossible for later scholars to piece together the facts. They also saw to it that facts would be further distorted by creating around the various accounts innumerable elaborations and exaggerations such as we now find in all myths, legends, and fairy tales. For a certain time, it seems that the efforts of the rebels were successful. The humans probably relied on their physical numbers. However, the evil ones who lost battles or who were deposed continued to practice their vile arts. More importantly, the offspring of those who had been genetically altered also continued to exist and procreate. They had within them the instincts of aggression and power mania innate to their forefathers. It is these persons who moved from the limbic and later the left brain modality who excelled in the technological sciences and were predisposed to feeling separate, distinct from, or superior to the planet's natural inhabitants. They were the ones who found it easy to destroy nature and to manipulate and murder their fellow human beings. Throughout historical time, we find personages rising to the top of political and cultural life who labor so assiduously for technological advance and yet who demonstrably display little love or concern for humanity. Do such scenarios occur for the reasons that we have been conditioned to believe? Can the same set of facts be approached from another angle? As we continue to review even more coherent and provocative hypotheses and theories concerning Atlantis, pre-Diluvian history, and the coming of evil, we note how scriptures, especially the Bible, contain references to key events. The history of the Old Testament is the history of Atlantis. Coleman's Beaumont, some key modern writers, such as Brinsley Law Portrench, Barbara Marciniak, and William Bramley have espoused other important theories that seek to account for the presence of evil in the world. These accounts relate to the same idea of alien visitation and colonization. In this case, the alien invaders are referred to either as the Serpent People or the Brotherhood of the Snake. It has been repeatedly noted that though physical snakes were unknown on most islands, the symbol of the snake or serpent on carvings, etc., is extremely conspicuous. In the apocalyptic fragment of Clement, we read, "And on earth shall be monsters, a generation of dragons of men and likewise of serpents." But though this is their title, it should not be taken that they had the physical likeness of serpents, which they did not. A fuller explanation of this is provided later. Though no two writers wholly agree on the question of evil, or an alien presence, according to the most coherent theories the visitors are usually described as being of dubious morality but possessed of great mental and technical power. This writer is relatively convinced that they were headquartered on Atlantis, and that the notion that this continent was the center of all that was elevated and good is erroneous, being founded less on fact and more on wishful thinking. Lemuria and Homo Atlantis. On Atlantis, genetic experiments were begun on indigenous Earth humans with the equipment that was brought from the alien planet of origin, and God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Genesis 1:26. The race that they subsequently created, the sons of the serpents, possessed the DNA of their alien fathers, as well as that of the indigenous Earth people, the Homo sapiens. In the Bible, the correct translation of create is build. These genetically created offspring were made to serve the needs of their creators in the Garden of Eden or Eden. They are Homo Atlantis. The original pre-Visitation Earth inhabitants were probably the Cro-Magnon, Engis, Homo erectus or Neanderthals. There could have been some other race altogether, but given the suppression of data in these subjects, it is doubtful if we will ever know the truth about our Earth ancestors. Recent findings seem to indicate that both Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon races were genetically interfered with and were the victims of hybridization. Unluckily for the serpent masters, this firstborn progeny eventually began to chafe against their imposed servitude. Their human qualities and sensibilities were such that they were not only lofty of intellect, but were possessed of a moral and spiritual dimension utterly lacking in their extraterrestrial masters. As a result of this, they openly began to resist their creators whom they disliked and came to physically outnumber. It is written that these sons of the serpent would not recognize the superiority of their masters, since they lacked the exalted qualities. Finally, after an unspecified period of time, the majority of the sons of the serpents leave the gardens of Eden Atlantis, and vacate the continent of Appalachia, relocating to the island of Oceania, later known as Lemuria, where today's Pacific Ocean is. Here they establish a thriving civilization where they also practice the high sciences. The sublime cultural inventions and philosophies that enrich humankind then and now originate from them. Lemuria comes from Mu or Mu Devi, which means the land ancestral or land of the ancestors. Mu Devi was the Hindu mother goddess. Shiva was her counterpart and is the great father of mankind. An Indian Tamil text, Salapatkaran, describes a lost continent in the Pacific and Indian Ocean that it calls Kumai Nadu or Kumari Kandam, which means the dragon land of the immortal serpents. Their rebellion and departure affronted their creators who, from that time onward, would consider their firstborn avowed adversaries. Chapter 5. The race of Adam. After the rebellion of their firstborn, the original serpent people were forced to return to the drawing boards to again begin reproducing a new race, one that would this time serve them obediently. We read of this in the Papal. Let us make him who shall nourish and sustain us. What shall we do to be invoked, in order to be remembered on earth? We have already tried with our first creations, our first creatures, but we could not make them praise Satan and Eve by William Blake or venerate us. So, then, let us try to make obedient, respectful beings who will nourish and sustain us. In a late Sumerian myth, it is declared that men were created to relieve the gods of the onerous task of tilling their fields. Men were to do that work for them and provide them with food through sacrifice. Joseph Campbell, Occidental Mythology. The serpent masters deduce that the first time round they had made a fundamental mistake. They had given their progeny the same intellectual capacities that they themselves possessed, which meant their creations also understood all about genetic science. This time, it was decided that such invaluable knowledge would be completely withheld and that the biological and cerebral centers of higher intelligence would be blocked. This would entail genetic modification. And the euphemism that has come down to us connoting this state of ignorance concerning the high sciences is naked. The members of this new slave race who are termed Adamic, meaning from the earth, would be kept naked in the garden. The words Adam and Eve, like those of Jehovah and Elohim, do not imply individuals but races. When this is understood, so much more becomes clear when reading and interpreting the scriptures. The Adamic race, like the original indigenous peoples of Earth, were of both genders, although the modified Eves could not reproduce sexually at that time. The male Adams, consistent with their human strain, possessed a foreskin. Later, it came down in priestly rituals that this human foreskin would be surgically removed as a mark of servitude to the overlords. Circumcision is the ritualized removal of the human aspect in favor of the alien, done to create a subliminal affiliation. When it is said that Eve was made from the rib of Adam while he slept, the reference is again to genetics and bioengineering. Being naked ultimately meant that the members of the hybrid Adamic servant race would be strictly forbidden to partake of something now referred to as the tree of the knowledge of good and evil or the tree of life. These were other cryptic euphemisms for the knowledge of biology and genetics. The DNA was always likened to a tree with 22 branches, or later in esoteric lore, pathways. The knowledge of genetic science was symbolized by possession of a straight staff with a serpent motif. This is the reason why even today, the medical profession uses the Hermetic caduceus. There is nothing esoteric about the term, tree of good and evil. When it is realized that the reference is to DNA, all becomes clear. Both sides, literally, the good and the evil had knowledge of the tree. Therefore, it should read as the tree of the good and / or the evil. Alan Alford is just one of many scientists who is open to the concept of alien intervention when accounting for the anomalies surrounding the origin and evolution of man. He writes, Homo sapiens has acquired a modern anatomy, language capability, and a sophisticated brain, well beyond the needs of its everyday existence, apparently in defiance of the laws of Darwinism. There are a number of possible explanations for this anomaly. One is that mankind evolved in the sea, and that crucial fossil evidence is thus missing. Another is that Darwinian theory itself has a missing link. And a third explanation is that the genes for modern man were suddenly implanted by an intelligent extraterrestrial species who colonized the Earth. Sir Leonard Woolley writes in Ur of the Chaldees, there is nothing to show to what race the first inhabitants of Mesopotamia belonged. At a date which we cannot fix, people of a new race made their way into the valley, coming whence we do not know. In Uriel's Machine, authors Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas write, Neanderthals did not contribute mitochondrial DNA to modern humans. Neanderthals are not our ancestors. In his book The Neanderthal Enigma, James Shreve comments on the enigma of our human development. An all-important transition did occur, but it happened so close to the present moment that we are still reeling from it. Some here in the vestibule of history, just before we started keeping records on ourselves, something happened that turned a passably precocious animal into a human being. Harvard scientist John A. Ball muses on the matter. Most evolutionists believe that life was generated long ago, but perhaps it never was. Perhaps the Earth was infected from elsewhere? Top scientist Gunther Rosenberg writes, man is a unique animal. He stands out like a sore thumb when comparisons are made with his cousins, the apes. The differences are more numerous than the similarities. Darwin's theory of evolution is simply unproven. Catastrophist and maverick scientist cosmologist Immanuel Velikovsky, probably one of the most abused scholars in history, wrote, most controversial is the evolutionary question. I have done a great deal of work on Darwin and can say with some assurance that Darwin did not derive his theory from nature but rather superimposed a certain philosophical worldview on nature and then spent 20 years trying to gather the facts to make it stick. And researcher Lawrence Gardner puts it this way, it took man over 1 million years to progress from using stones as he found them to the realization that they could be chipped and flaked to better purpose. It then took another 500,000 years before Neanderthal man mastered the concept of stone tools and a further 50,000 years before crops were cultivated and metallurgy was discovered. Hence, by all scales of evolutionary reckoning, we should still be far removed from any basic understanding of mathematics, engineering or science, but here we are, only 7,000 years later, landing probes on Mars. So, how did we inherit wisdom, and from whom? And most mysterious of all, we have the following from the mouth of one of the acclaimed co-founders of the theory of evolution, Alfred Wallace himself. Some intelligent power has guided or determined the development of man, and in the fascinating book Mankind, Child of the Stars, Max H. Flint and Otto Binder detail a very important anomaly. Molybdenum, a very rare metal, plays an important role as a trace element in the physiology of all Earth creatures. It is surprising, therefore, that life so dependent on a rare metal should arise on a molybdenum-poor world like ours. These acclaimed scientists point out that there are many other specialists with serious doubts about the relation of evolution theory to the origin and ascent of man. They state, we are not quarreling with natural selection, as it applies to other creatures. But we do state unequivocally that Darwinian evolution and natural selection do not apply to mankind at all. They draw our attention to 35,000 years BC to the specific transition from the species of Neanderthals who are not our ancestors to Cro-Magnon who are believed to be. They write, and the greatest riddle of all comes up, where did Cro-Magnon man, the first of our own Homo sapien species, come from 35,000 years ago? The disappearance of Neanderthal man and the advent of Cro-Magnon man at approximately the same time is one of the truly big stumbling blocks to the evolution theory, for they are non sequitur species. Neanderthal most decidedly could not be the direct ancestor of Cro-Magnon, for they were two distinctly different types of human, physically and even skeletally. Had a big brain, but small mental capacity. Was a mass of muscle. Was replaced suddenly by Cro-Magnon, who was a completely separate species. Neanderthal most decidedly could not be the direct ancestor of Cro-Magnon, for they were two distinctly different types of human, physically and even skeletally. Neanderthal man endured both cold and mild cycles with apparently equal success. He continued to exist in Western Europe right up to about 35,000 years ago, and then he abruptly disappeared. The evolutionary tendencies that he exhibited during this period are extremely puzzling. For he seems to have gotten more primitive, not less so. Classical evolution theory simply cannot account for these two events. First, the abrupt disappearance of a whole well-entrenched species, plus the abrupt debut of a better species. Second, the fact that the Neanderthal species retrogressed and became more primitive as time went on. Natural selection and survival of the fittest are square pegs that cannot be hammered into those round holes. These scientists are both convinced that biogenetic intervention and hybridization resulted in the demise of the Neanderthal and the sudden appearance of the much more sophisticated Cro-Magnon. And they are far from being lone speculators in the orthodox academic community. Dr. Robert Bloom, noted paleontologist, came out with a pronouncement that probably staggered all his colleagues, saying it was clear to him that evolution was accomplished not by natural selection or mutations but by spiritual beings of various grades and various kinds of intelligence. This is an appropriate place to point out the reason why the term serpent was and is used as a moniker for the Nephilim and their offspring. It refers to knowledge, especially of the arcane kind. It refers to the technological mastery that they possessed. Even in Hebrew, for instance, the root nhsh, that is, serpent, means to decipher, to find out, implying that the Nephilim were scientists. The opposing sides both used and continue to use the serpent symbol, but with certain differences. The sons of the serpent, with the human DNA and human sensibilities, use the serpent usually in a winged form, or with a crown, or even as multicolored. Often referred to as the Urais, the agathodaimon, the feathered serpent, or even the opposing often referred to as the Urais, the agathodaimon, the feathered serpent, or even the phoenix, it is a positive symbol, and like the dragon with 5 toes is connected to wisdom, white magic, and mystical practice. The plain non-winged, non-crowned, generally plain-appearing snake, like the dragon with 3 claws, is a negative symbol used by the original aliens and by underworld criminal syndicates. After the creation of the Adamic race, the Atlanteans felt confident that their colonization of the Earth was finally secure. They now had a subservient underclass that would labor and provide for them. Everything looked good. However, something happened that thwarted their plans for a third time. The sons of the serpents on Lemuria found out what their fathers were doing and about the newly created race that had taken their place as unwitting servants to evil. It occurred to them that such experiments were wrong and that this latest servant race was, although ignorant, part human and, therefore, cousins to themselves. It was decided that emissaries of the Sons of the Serpents would make contact with the new race. Members of the Sons of the Serpents entered the garden to open dialogue with their cousins in bondage and spiritual ignorance. The male Adams were not that interested in the counsel of their visitors. But the females, the Eves, were. It is said that the Eves found the newcomers comely and attractive. The visitors told those Adams and Eves who would listen that they were being kept in a state of induced ignorance and servitude, but that it was within them to become gods themselves, and that if they left the garden and came to Lemuria, Oceania, they would be shown all that had been hid from them and be awakened to their true natures. Finally, because of this intercession, a great multitude of the Adamic race did follow their wise visitors to their island paradise. They were taken to Lemuria by spacecraft. Eden by William Blake. The experience of transport through Earth's atmosphere was recorded by some and passed down the generations in what are now considered fabulous tales of chariots of fire. The visions of the prophets Enoch and Ezekiel and the experience of Babylonian King Etana are related to these actual events and experiences. Due to the relocation of the Adamic race, we find a compulsion in the psychology of humans to seek for some lost paradise or faraway shore where life is sublime and untroubled. This instinct appears especially strong in members of the female sex. Because of the allegiance of the Eves and their curiosity toward the high mysteries, the matriarchal cults of the priestess began. These cults of power women existed down to medieval times, when the Brotherhood of the Snake, under the guise of Catholicism, rose up to destroy them en masse. The Eves have never been forgiven for their abandonment of the alien hegemony. Their decision sealed their fate. That the compilers of the Old Testament and the creators of the anthrocentric, monotheistic religions propound the subservience of woman should be enough proof of whom they serve. The following passage reveals the wrath of the Atlanteans, not only toward their firstborn, but also toward the Eves, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle, and above every beast of the field, upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shall you eat all the days of thy life. Genesis 3:14 In Eve seen at the tree. Nothing is said to indicate that the serpent who appeared and spoke to her was a deity in his own right, who had been revered in the Levant for at least 7,000 years before the composition of the Book of Genesis. Joseph Campbell, Occidental Mythology, the appellation Satan, in Hebrew, belongs by right to the first and cruelest adversary of all other gods, Jehovah, not in the serpent which spoke only words of sympathy and wisdom. Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, women have always been marginalized and degraded in post-Diluvian times because of their allegiance to the firstborn. The Book of Genesis reveals the intense hatred that the bent ones have toward the female. The tyrannies which have been perpetrated against womankind through all the centuries, though disguised as a male versus female problem, are certainly not at all confined to this, which is why very little is changing. The gender problem and dichotomy are but a carefully crafted manifestation of a greater malevolence and all-pervasive ancient loathing for Earth's original inhabitants. Once we approach the problem from its root, we will see progress. When we look back across the historical time of patriarchy, there seems to be some terrible inevitability, a relentless desire to crush the female essence, human and divine. The question of why is one of the most puzzling of our time. Leonard Scolane, The Alphabet and the Goddess. Chapter 6 The War. LD falls dead eventually. The exodus of the Adamic race became known to the serpent masters, who grew furious and vengeful. This was the third time that their plans and exploits had been thwarted. First, they were banished from their home planet. Then after coming to a new one, they created a race to serve them, but which did not, and when they finally created the perfect servant, they found them permanently seduced away from their duties. The ire of the Atlanteans at this snubbing was so intense that they unleashed an atomic war on the sons of the serpent, and their Adamic wards, now resident on Lemuria, Oceania. These latter were not unprepared, however, and being technically advanced, set up to defend themselves and retaliate against their evil adversaries on Atlantis. So, there was on Earth a nuclear war. It was an event that changed the face of Earth history. The war between the gods, the serpent masters and the sons of the serpents, and subsequent paroxysms were recorded by almost all the cultures of the world, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man, and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. Genesis 6-8. And there was war in heaven, Micheal and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil, and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world, he was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Revelation 12:7-12, Woe unto us! Who shall deliver us out of the land of these almighty gods? These are the gods that smote the Egyptians with all manner of plagues in the wilderness. Samuel 4:8. And all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord and by his fierce anger. Jeremiah 4:23. For behold, the Lord will come with fire, and his chariots, like the whirlwind, to render his anger with fury. Isaiah 6:15, And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every freeman, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains. And they shall go into the holes of the rocks, and into the caves of the earth, for fear of the Lord, when he ariseth to shake terribly the earth. Isaiah 2, But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which heaven shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat, the earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. Book of Peter. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness, and smote the four corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead, and only I am escaped alone to tell thee. Job 18:19, His lightnings enlightened the world, the earth saw and trembled. The hills melted like wax at the presence of the Lord. Psalms 97:4. While reading these accounts, one may do well to reflect on the personality of the Lord and wonder if the activities mentioned are not those to be expected of a more human agency. Tim the Lord, and there is none else. I form the light and create the darkness, I make peace and create evil, the Lord, do all these things? Book of Isaiah. He that sacrificeth to any god save unto the Lord only, he shall be utterly destroyed. Exodus 22:20, By the sweat of your face will be your bread, until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. Genesis 3:17-19 Then shall ye know that I am the Lord, when their slain men shall be among their idols round about their altars, upon every high hill, in all the tops of the mountains, and under every green tree, and under every thick oak, the place where they did offer sweet savour to all their idols. So will I stretch out my hand upon them, and make the land desolate. And they shall know that I am the Lord. Ezekiel 6:13-14 Wherefore as I live, saith the Lord God, surely, because thou hast defiled my sanctuary with all thy detestable things, and with all thine abominations, therefore will I also diminish thee. Neither shall mine eye spare, neither will I have any pity. Ezekiel 5:11 So will I send upon you famine and evil beasts, and they shall bereave thee, and pestilence and blood shall pass through thee, and I will bring the sword upon thee. I the Lord have spoken it. Ezekiel 5:17 It appears, after all, that the words of Madame Helena Blavatsky, who spent her life researching the actual origins of mankind, are more than appropriate. The appellation Satan, in Hebrew, and adversary, belongs by right to the first and cruelest adversary of all other gods, Jehovah, not in the serpent which spoke only words of sympathy and wisdom. Under the evil insinuations of their demon Thevatat, the Atlantis race became a nation of evil magicians. The giants and magicians and all flesh died, and every man. And author Jack Beringer also expresses the travesty of man's perplexity. We have been led to believe that the entity that the Old Testament describes as a mass murderer and heinous leader is the God of the universe. We have been led to think that the slaughter of human beings in the name of God is a divine act. And all through these passages is the reference to more than one God. A perfect example follows: thou shalt not revile the gods. Exodus 22:28, scholar and genius, Ignatius Donnelly wrote of the tribulations, it sounds like the cry not of a man but of a race, a great, religious, civilized race, who could not understand how God could so cruelly visit the world. And from Coleman's Beaumont's The Riddle of Prehistoric Britain. The prehistory of the Atlanteans and the race of Adam possessed peculiar similarities. The supermen of Plato's island were drowned in a flood like the Adamites, the giants of old time, men of renown, the men whose thoughts became wholly evil, destroyed in what is called the flood or universal deluge. The cause advanced for their destruction was in effect the same in both cases, they being accused of having mastered too many of the divine secrets of, as we should say, science as the ancients named it, the gods. The Indians of Lake Tahoe, California say, there was a time when their tribe possessed the whole earth and were strong and numerous, and rich, but a day came when a people rose up stronger than they and defeated and enslaved them. Afterward the Great Spirit sent an immense wave across the continent from the sea, and this wave engulfed both the oppressors and the oppressed, all but a very small remnant. The ancient Britons, the profligacy of mankind had provided the Great Supreme to send a pestilential wind upon the earth. A pure poison descended, every blast was death. Presently, a tempest fire arose. It split the earth asunder to the great deep. Rain poured down from heaven, and water covered the earth. From Destruction of Atlantis by Ignatius Donnelly, Bolivian records going back 5,000 years tell of the destruction of civilization in far-off times as the result of a conflict with some non-human race whose blood was not red like ours. The Uruquer Indians of Bolivia speak of the demon Amasun who destroyed plants, animals, and man by causing fire to fall from heaven. The Algonquian Indians relate, long ago, two powerful Manadas felt themselves insulted by the hero Waizaka. This put them into a fearful passion, and intending to kill their enemy, they raged and roared over the earth, which heaved and shook under their angry steps. From the Norse Edda, we read, Then saw she wade in heavy streams, men, foul murderers and perjurers, and them who others' wives seduced to sin, brothers slay brothers, sisters' children shed each other's blood. Hard is the world, sensual sin grows huge. These are the sword ages, axe ages, shields are cleft in twain, storm ages, murder ages till the world falls dead. The Norse legends tell of the great winters of wind, sword, and wolf which descended upon the earth. The second winter is called the winter of the sword. Those of mankind left alive rob and slay one another for what is left to feed on. Brother slays brother, mighty battles occur in the world. Their adversarial presence was termed the Midgard serpent. The Midgard serpent blows so much poison that the whole sky and sea are splattered with it. Strange flying craft bringing destruction are described. The mighty flood frees the ship known as Naglfar, a vessel that the giants were so long in building. Loki steers the ship of hell with the Fenris wolf aboard. They also speak specifically of Ragnarok, the war between the gods. The head of Mimir, fountain of all wisdom, counsels Odin to meet on the field of Vigrid, and to wage there such a war that the power of evil would be destroyed forever, even though his own world would be destroyed with them. Now death is the portion of doomed men, red with blood the buildings of gods, the sun turns black in the summer after, winds whine. In northern Sweden, the Laplanders preserve their accounts. Their ancient books say, "I shall reverse the world. I shall bid the rivers flow upward, I shall cause the sea to gather together itself up into a huge towering wall which I shall hurl upon your wicked earth children, and thus destroy them and all life." The Scandinavian skalds record in their sagas and poems, Surtur, Saturn from the south winds with seething fire the falchion of the mighty one a sunlight flaming mountains dash together giants headlong rush men rend the paths of hell and heaven is rent in twain Siberian accounts relate, in the beginning was the earth, but then a great fire arose and raged for 7 years and the earth was burned up. Everything became sea. All the Tungus were consumed except a boy and a girl who rose up with an eagle in the sky. The Persians Bundahis relate in their legends, in 90 days and nights the heavenly angels were contending in the world with the confederate demons of the evil spirit. And there are the commentaries of more modern sources also, from those illustrious ones who have contributed to our present civilization. Here are just a few examples. From Ovid's Metamorphosis, giants attacked the very throne of heaven. Jove struck them down. 3 times had Poseidon, Neptune, ventured with stern countenance to thrust his arms out of the water, 3 times he was unable to endure the scorching heat of the air. From Plato's Timaeus, in one day and one fatal night, there came mighty earthquakes and inundations that engulfed that warlike peoples. The people, terrified, could hardly breathe. Mouths were drenched in blood, heads swallowed in blood. The face was made pale by the evil wind. From Plato's Critias, this vast power, gathered into one, endeavored to subdue with a blow our country and yours and the whole of the region. Then, Solon your country shone forth, in the excellence of her virtue and strength among all mankind. She was preeminent in military skill and was the leader of the Hellenes. She defeated and triumphed over the invaders and preserved from slavery those who were not yet subjugated, and generously liberated all the rest of us who dwell between the pillars. But afterwards, occurred violent earthquakes and floods and in a single day and night of misfortune all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea. From the Homeric sagas, we read, "Beneath the feet of the father of the gods Olympus shook as he moved, the earth groaned, and from the lightning of his bolt, as well as from the eyes and breath of his antagonist, fire was bursting over the dark sea. The ocean boiled, towering waves beat upon all promontories of the coast, the ground quaked, Hades, lord of the dead, trembled, and even Zeus himself, for a time, was unstrung. And let us not neglect the accounts from Egypt, later bastion of the sons of the serpents." From the Egyptian Apur papyrus of 1780 BC, we read, "The land to its whole extent confusion and terrible noise. For 9 days there was no exit from the palace and no one could see the face of his fellow. Towns were destroyed by mighty tides. Upper Egypt suffered devastation. Blood everywhere. Pestilence throughout the country." The Egyptian scribe Manetho records information seemingly about the era of the pharaoh Amenephis, but which is really about a previous time. His was an intensely dramatic era which culminated in a prolonged war, the invasion of his country by vast and well-armed hordes, accompanied by meteorological events of a phenomenal character, and finally ended in the great catastrophe which destroyed him and most of his nation. In spell 316 of the Egyptian coffin texts, we find the following passages, referring to powerful destructive weaponry. "So the gods were brought together, readdressed none, behold, mankind who came from my eye, have been scheming against me. None replied, O Re, if your eye was turned against those, how greatly would they fear you? Hathor said, I have prevailed over mankind and it is pleasant to my heart. Then Re said, now that I am in control of them, do not reduce them any more. Behold it, the eye will be stronger than all the gods. It has mastered those who dwellest at the ends of the earth, it is sovereign over every god. They will fall howling on their faces, all mankind will cringe beneath you and your might, they will respect you when they behold you in vigorous form which the master of the primeval gods gave you." This same eye turns up in Irish mythology as Bulwer's evil eye, which needed to be operated, that is, opened and closed by Bulwer's 9 specially trained bodyguards. The descriptions clearly relate to some kind of lethal device. The Celtic legends are very lucid in respect to magical weaponry and power. Their records give pronounced indication. The Celtic legends are very lucid in respect to magical weaponry and powers. We read of weapons of strange power and magical properties, which literally needed several men to use. Their records give pronounced indications of genetic engineering in the tales of demonic hybrid entities called the Fomorian race, or men of Lachlan, endowed with great powers, clairvoyance, and physical strength. We hear mention of glass towers from which the evil overlords could keep watch over the entire island. The later races subjugated the land of Ireland and its natives for centuries until they were finally overthrown. The Celtic word Fomori means giants and also derives from a term that means from under the seas. The myths say that the Fomorians lived under the ocean. Interestingly, one of the ancient names for the mythical Lost Isles was Turfothuan, meaning land beneath the wave. One of these mysterious weapons mentioned in the Irish sagas was the lance of Lugh, the sun god. Lugh was called Ildnak, or master of all the arts, but also the far shooter. Here is a description of his strange lance. He also had a magic spear, which he had no need to wield himself, for it was alive and thirsted for blood. When battle was near, it was drawn out, then it roared and struggled. Against its thongs, fire flashed from it. It tore through and through the ranks of the enemy, never tired of slaying. See Celtic Myth and Legend by Charles Squire, The Book of Conquests, and The Silver Arm by Jim Fitzpatrick. Another weapon of power was the sword of the High King Nuada, called Retaliator. It is the prototype of Excalibur. Retaliator was said to vibrate in the presence of negative forces or enemies. The Celts had the strange prohibition that no king could rule who was blemished. This does not make sense until we realize what it relates to as genetic alteration. The High King of the Gaels, Nuada himself, had to step down as leader after his arm was severed in the Titanic War with the Fomorian hybrids. He subsequently had his missing limb replaced with a silver arm. The astonishing account of this limb's magical replacement clearly bespoke some form of advanced cybernetics. See Celtic Myth and Legend by Charles Squire. The Greeks and Teutons, as so many others, also have records of hybrid beings that had the countenance of either great beauty or ugliness. See Clash of the Titans, Jason and the Argonauts, The Odyssey, and the Amazing Voyages of Sinbad. The Hindu Srimad Bhagavatam tells of a demon race which invaded the 3 planetary systems. Opposing the demons was the god Shiva, who, it is recorded, possessed a powerful weapon that he fired at the enemy airships from his own. In the ancient Ramayana, there is mention of an iron thunderbolt capable of killing hundreds of thousands of humans. It was also said to be so powerful that it could have destroyed the earth. These weapons could only be used by royal decree. There are even passages where it mentions the fact that the weapon was used as retaliation for the other side using it first. In another Vedic tome called Samarangana Sutradhara, there is mention of manned space rockets, as well as their means of propulsion. In the Samara Sutradhara, we find mention of the use of biological weapons, each of which produced its own specific effect. The Samara debilitated its victims by attacking the motor center of the brain, and the Moha caused blockage of nerve impulses, resulting in complete paralysis. In the Chinese Feng Shen Vini, we find similar descriptions of germ warfare, and again reference is made to specific weapons causing specific results. The Indian philosopher Alakya discussed in his teachings the miniature solar system within the atom, molecular construction and transformation, as well as the theory of relativity, more than 2,800 years before Einstein. From the epic Mahabharata, we read the following astonishing passage: "It was as if the elements had been unleashed. The sun spun round. Scorched by the incandescent heat of the weapon, the world reeled in fever. Elephants were set on fire by the heat and ran to and fro in a frenzy. Water boiled, animals died, the enemy was mown down, and the raging of the blaze made the trees collapse. Horses and war chariots were burnt up. Thousands of chariots were destroyed, then deep silence descended on the sea. The corpses of the fallen were mutilated by the terrible heat so that they no longer looked like human beings. Never before have we seen such a ghastly weapon, and never before have we heard of such a weapon." When the Mahabharata was to be translated in the last half of the 19th century into modern languages, the descriptions of ancient warfare were generally expunged. His sabha clung to the sky at a league's length. He threw at me rockets, missiles, spears, spikes, battle axes, 3-bladed javelins, flame-throwers, without pausing. The sky seemed to hold 100 suns, 100 moons, and 100 myriad stars. Neither day nor night could be made out, or the points of compass. And again, this weapon was so feared that in great distress of mind the king had the bolt reduced to fine powder and thrown into the sea. Even with these precautions, people's hair and fingernails fell out overnight, birds turned white and their legs became scarlet and blistered, and food went bad. Gurkha, flying in his swift and powerful Vimana, hurled against the 3 cities of the Frishis and Andhakas a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. It was the unknown weapon, the Iron Thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death which reduced to ashes the entire race of the Frishnas and Antakas. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. Their hair and nails fell out, pottery broke without apparent cause, and the birds turned white. After a few hours all foodstuffs were infected. To escape from this fire the soldiers threw themselves in streams to wash themselves and their equipment. Pratap Chandra Roy's translation of 1889 in the 1950s. The father of the atomic bomb, Robert Oppenheimer, who frequently quoted the Mahabharata, was asked by a student at Rochester University whether his atomic bomb was the first in history to be exploded. He suggestively answered, "Well, yes, in modern times, of course." Add to these accounts those of visitations and even space journeys, like those of Ezekiel, Enoch and Etana and others. Moreover, how does the detractor explain the presence of radioactive tektites and isotopes at the very sites now known to be the biblical Sodom and Gomorrah and Jericho? What of the strange radioactive corpses found in Mohenjo-daro in India, the descriptions of which accord perfectly with what was seen in Nagasaki and Hiroshima? What are we to make of the presence of fused glass in Scotland, Iraq, and Libya? Tektites found at these and other locations continue to confound the experts. In the Libyan desert, fused glass, radioactive tektites, were discovered and then analyzed by Dr. R.F. Dolphin. After studying the Libyan desert glass, Dolphin suggested that for the ancient Phoenicians to have worked with temperatures equivalent to 6,000 degrees Celsius, they may have known the secret of atomic power. See page 115, The Atlantis Blueprint by Colin Wilson and Rand Flemeth. 6,000 degrees Celsius is only 2,000 degrees less than the temperature of the sun. In the same place was found jars and vases which had been fashioned in the same manner as one would see clay. The only difference was that these artifacts were made of some of the hardest substances known, basalt, quartz, and diorite. The necks of the vases were so narrow that no hand could have been used to fashion their interiors. High temperatures had to have been employed. But how is still a mystery to the experts? Exceptionally high temperatures are also needed to remove impurities from gold. Scientists were perplexed when necklaces found in the Libyan desert were made of 100% pure gold. The answer to all this is what was suspected by the good doctor, but which most academics are very reluctant to accept: atomic energy was indeed known and used in the days of old. Researchers and authors, Valdemar Valerian, Charles Berlitz, J.J. Hurtak, and David Hatcher Childress, relate hundreds of accounts such as this in their pivotal works. In the account of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the fleeing prophet, Lot, is told by the angels of the Lord not to turn back, because the wrath of the Lord was coming to that place. Lot's wife does look back and is straightway turned into what is described as a pillar of salt. But this is a mistranslation. The word is more like our English vapor. Add to these the accounts of the walls of Jericho, or the story in Exodus of the 10 plagues, not to mention the entire books of Job, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Revelation, which are full of catastrophe and godly wrath. With all this and an endless amount more, it becomes practically and rationally irrefutable that a war of the gods did indeed take place in pre-Diluvian times, when ferocious weaponry was possessed and used by both sides. There is good reason to believe that the terms Sodom and Gomorrah originally referred to Atlantis, Appalachia, and Lemuria. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities, and all the plains, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. Genesis 24-26, and again, mention of weapons. O my people that dwellest in Zion, be not afraid of the Assyrian, he shall smite thee with a rod, and shall lift up his staff against thee, after the manner of Egypt. He shall flee from the iron weapon, and the bow shall strike him through. Job 14:24. O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger, and the staff in their hand is mine indignation, woe unto us! Who shall deliver us out of the land of these almighty gods? These are the gods that smote the Egyptians with all manner of plagues in the wilderness. Samuel 4:8. That the ancients had weapons of power has been a fact long sequestered by the elites. Authors who have sought to expose the facts have been persecuted, ridiculed, and had their work suppressed. One of these master researchers was Comins Beaumont, who wrote the following: I have said comparatively little in regard to the prehistoric science and weapons, including firearms, although it is manifest that they played the most vital part in ancient power politics. Possession of the knowledge of metallurgy must have been one of the most urgent yet secret objects on the part of those who desire to rule the ancient world. I cannot overstress how vital and important is always the problem of weapons. In his book Interpretation of Radium, the great physicist Frederick Soddy wrote, "Can we not read in them some justification for the belief that some forgotten race of men attain not only the knowledge that we have so recently won, but also that power that is not yet ours? I believe that there have been civilizations in the past that were familiar with atomic energy and that by misusing it they were totally destroyed." The Smithsonian Institute and the Bureau of Standards in Washington finally proved that over 7,000 years ago, steel was made in furnaces which burned as hot as 9,000 degrees centigrade. But those who have read the Book of Enoch will recall that the contrivance of metal and weapons had different origins than any modern scientist is going to publicly espouse. And Azazel taught men to make swords, and knives and shields and breastplates and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working with them. And they were led astray, and became corrupt in all their ways. The war of the gods is recorded in the Bible. Veiled references to it include the term, firstborn. This euphemism turns up in the Old Testament. We read of Jehovah, for instance, striking down the firstborn of the Pharaoh for Moses. Later, in the New Testament, Herod goes after the firstborn of the so-called Israelites in his search for the Christ child. If you ask what is productive in attacking those without any sin, when the resources would be better used striking at the actual enemy? Little in theological texts will make sense until that which is literal is distinguished from what is not, when primary usages of a word, phrase, or term are distinguished from secondary or tertiary usages. Firstborn relates to the original progeny of the serpent masters, that is, the members of the Lemurian race. Things become easier still when we identify the serpent masters with the race of Jehovah and the sons with the Elohim. Elohim comes from Elu, meaning the shining ones. Shining ones is an ambivalent term used for both the Nephilim and their firstborn. The shining ones are often depicted with horns on their heads. This was a symbol of wisdom, but also of rulership. This is why shamans, priests, and kings adopted the convention of wearing horns also, especially in the form of the crown. This was to primarily indicate that they were descendants of either the Atlanteans or the Lemurians and were endowed with power. Michelangelo sculpted Moses with horns on his head to indicate his blood bond to the antediluvian kings. Every scholar must be aware that there are two distinct styles, two schools, so to speak, plainly traceable in the Hebrew scriptures, the Elohistic and the Javistic. The portions belonging to these respectively are so blended together, so completely mixed up by later hands, that often all external characteristics are lost. Yet it is known that the two schools were antagonistic. Madame Helena Blavatsky, The Secret Doctrine, Vol. 3. Many cryptic terms are used to describe the adversaries and their conflict. Many seemingly incomprehensible motifs and anecdotes from the world's legends can be made lucid once the reader knows what is really being implied. And this was comprehended by the American master of the pre-Diluvian epics, Ignatius Donnelly, who demonstrated his discernment concerning the terrestrial tribulations when he wrote, "It sounds like the cry not of a man but of a race, a great, religious, civilized race, who could not understand how God could so cruelly visit the world." This fact can be corroborated by a close reading of the Old Testament. In it, we hear of the strange meeting Moses had at the burning bush. This has long been a point of conjecture, but can easily be explained when the imagery is replaced by fact. Jehovah announces to Moses' question, "I am the God of thy fathers." Scholars have pointed out that Moses' doubt as to the nature and preeminence of Jehovah is strange, to say the least, and that Jehovah should need no introduction to a devoted Israelite. Moreover, the introduction clearly implies that Moses is in fact one of the progeny of the sons of the serpents his fathers, but has now had the misfortune to come into contact with one of their fathers, that is, one of the original serpent masters, maybe even the main man. The second revealing anecdote happens when Moses and Aaron are in the presence of the Pharaoh. The scriptures speak of them having to prove their credentials to Pharaoh by changing Aaron's rod into a serpent. This is strange, since Israelites were forbidden by Jehovah to engage in magical practices. Anyway, the Egyptians produce their own rod, which likewise becomes a serpent, and so on. This tale of the conflict between the two serpents is a barely disguised reference to that between the races. The same motif appears in the Arthurian sagas, with the contest between the red and white dragons, which is the dream of Uther Pendragon, father of King Arthur. The very name Pendragon means head of the dragons, that is, the race of good serpents, from which the Celts and Gaels descended. Other cultures have similar leitmotifs expressing the same story. The Saxon tale of St. George and the Dragon is a perfect fictional rendition of it. In the Old Testament, passages relating to the twins, Jacob and Esau, may well refer obliquely to the pre-Diluvian bipartisanism and their ongoing antagonism. In your limbs lie nations twain, rival races from their birth, one the mastery shall gain, the younger or the elder reign. The meaning behind the euphemisms of the combating serpents or dragons has to do with the antagonism within the biology of the Homo Atlantis. The reference is to the coils of DNA, to the alien and human strands and their incompatibility. The folktales which have to do with the evil and good twin, the dark and fair sisters, the white and black witches, the twin towers, the true and false knights, the hero's descent and ascent, etc., also conceal the same meta-theme. From Robin Hood to Swan Lake, from Hercules and the Hydra to Jason and the Golden Fleece, from the Odin hanging on the winding tree to Conan the Barbarian, from Alice through the Looking Glass to Dungeons and Dragons, the themes are one. What is the tree of the East and the tree of the West? What are the two seraphim who guard the Ark of the Covenant? What are the gates of Valhalla? Why are there twin columns at the portals of illustrious edifices? What do the swastika, the double-headed eagle, the Masonic double cube, the double barred cross of Lorraine, the two Knights Templars riding one horse, really signify? What are the real pillars of Hercules that guarded the way to Atlantis? Of central importance to the proof of the war between the gods is the purely scientific accounts of the devastation that affected the Earth's flora and fauna, what then has exterminated so many species and whole genera. The mind is at first irresistibly hurried into the belief of some great catastrophe, but thus to destroy animals both large and small. We must shake the entire framework of the globe. No lesser physical event could have brought about this wholesale destruction not only in the Americas but in the entire world. Certainly no fact in the long history of the world is so startling as the wide and repeated extermination of its inhabitants. Charles Darwin quote from Journal, Voyage of the HMS Beagle, animals that had been native for millions of years disappeared under circumstances that were suspiciously sudden. The loss of over 30 genera of large mammals, and many other species of large animals in North America alone. Paul S. Martin, who or what destroyed our mammoths, at the end of the Pleistocene about 10,000 years ago, there was an extinction event that decimated the large terrestrial mammalian herbivores and carnivores of North America, South America and Australia. In North America alone, more than 32 genera of mammals became extinct. The cause of this extinction is debatable. R. W. Graham, Evolution of New Ecosystems at the End of the Pleistocene, however ingeniously and with whatever subtlety we may deal with our evidence, the facts constrain therefore to one inevitable conclusion. The mammoth and its companions perished by some widespread catastrophe which operated over a wide area and not through the slow process of the ordinary struggle for existence. Not the result of gradual accumulation, but the result of one of nature's hecatombs on a grand and widespread scale when a vast fauna perished simultaneously. Henry Howarth, The Mammoth and the Flood, 1887, from the masterpiece, When the Earth Nearly Died, by scientists Solan and Dallaire. In Europe, immense herds of diverse animals utterly vanished off the face of the earth for no obvious biological reason. Coincident with this dreadful slaughter upon the land was the deposition of myriads of contemporary marine shells, and the stranding at great elevations of marine mammals, porpoises, walruses and seals. In Siberia, the picture is everywhere one of appalling disorder, carnage and wholesale destruction, with countless animals and plants frozen in positions of death ever since the day they perished. As a result, their remains are amazingly fresh-looking and are frequently indistinguishable from those of animals and plants that have died mere weeks ago. The magnitude of the biological extinctions achieved by the deluge almost transcends the imagination. It annihilated literally billions of biological units of both sexes and every age indiscriminately. Only incredibly powerful flood waters operating worldwide could have achieved such results, and only a flood produced by the means previously suggested could have operated globally. It is astonishing that such an unscientific explanation ever came to be formulated, yet in a short time both it and the concept of immense thick ice sheets descending from a hypothetical northern mountain system to cover all of northern and eastern North America and western and northern Eurasia was enthusiastically embraced as virtually established fact. The evidence is perfectly unambiguous. Along with the removal of an ice age like that which has been hitherto commonly envisaged, the evidence suggests that there is something seriously amiss with the last phases of standard geological chronology. Evidence thus converges from numerous directions to support the conclusion that, on the testimony of radiocarbon and other dating techniques, immense physical and climatic changes occurred on Earth some 11,000 years or so ago, when an ice age that probably never existed came to an end, and an apparently uniformitarian regime was abruptly terminated. The gigantic worldwide tectonic disturbances of the late Pleistocene times occurred almost simultaneously on a near unimaginable scale, precisely what could be expected from a powerful external influence but not from the Ice Age conditions conventionally believed to have existed then. Significantly, a drop in the strength of the Earth's magnetic field appears to have occurred sometime between 13,750 and 12,350 years ago, attended by various other important changes, including earthquakes, volcanism, water table fluctuations and large-scale climatic variations. Of these, severe earthquakes in particular may even induce axial wobble and polarity reversals. 50. Studies have shown that at 10,178 BC, or over 12,000 years ago, the celestial pole was inclined at an angle of 30 degrees from its present position. This in turn strongly suggests that the terrestrial axis then oriented differently from today. Archaeologists all over the world have realized that much of prehistory as written in the existing textbooks is inadequate, some of it quite simply wrong. What? No ice age which came and went, spreading over hundreds of thousands of years as all good geologists proclaim. No smothering ice sheets which enveloped the British Isles and much of the northern parts of the continent, changed the climate to Arctic conditions, although, strangely enough, much of our fauna and flora survived despite it and compelled all the survivors to flee. No lengthy periods of ice alternated with warm and even subtropical climatical interludes. No, nothing of the sort. There was admittedly a tremendous convulsion of nature, which had the most direful effect upon the inhabitants of Scandinavia, the British Isles, and those in northern Asia. It resulted in giving us, it is true, bitter cold, tremendous floods, and cruel dampness. That it affected the climate in the north adversely and permanently cannot be denied. It did other things as well. But no ice age. Comyn's Beaumont, riddle of prehistoric Britain, it was an event? Sudden, rapid, devastating and appalling in its magnitude and destructiveness. It was a celestial impact of an immense cometary body. It rained or distributed rocks, stones, boulder clay, till, gravel, sand, and other material over great areas, utterly obliterating certain parts, elevating others, and entirely missing some regions. It created islands, drowned others, caused immense tidal waves which swallowed up coastal lands, consumed huge spaces with electric waves, set up volcanoes, and swept away cities and largely populated districts almost in a flash. It has been suggested that the changes now at work in prehistory herald the shift to a new paradigm, made necessary by the collapse of the first paradigm. Colin Renfrew, Before Civilization, when we hear of the coming of the angels of the Lord to humans, like Manu India, Satiravata India, Khesistra India, Ea, Iran, Noah, Semitic, Deucalion, Greece, Wyphon, Wales, Nuada Ireland, Bergelmir, Scandinavia, Coxcox, Mexico, and Nada, Aztec, warning of the coming deluge, we must understand that it is members of the sons of the serpents who brought the warnings and not, as is believed, the representatives of Jehovah. Now if we are to answer the question of how evil has really come into the world and if it is correct to state that it did so because of alien interaction, then the question appropriately arises as to how we are still battling with the problem of evil today. Why is it not all over and done with given that the conflict began in pre-Diluvian times? Surely, if evil had conquered, then today there would be no question of good being an alternative or a presence in the world. And if good had triumphed, then today we would all be living in peace and harmony. The reason why we are still resolving this today, why good and evil still operate side by side, personally and collectively, is because there was a variable, in the days of old, that prevented resolution. This variable was unforeseen by either side and caused the endgame to be delayed, literally by millennia. The variable had to do with the global war mentioned previously. The use of the weapons of mass destruction caused the planet Earth itself to react violently. It is written that the ferocity of the war caused the very moisture in the atmosphere to completely evaporate. The air was literally incinerated or irradiated. It was either this conflagration or some other related event that affected the Roche limit, and which caused a dramatic alteration in the magnetism of the Earth. As a result, the Earth deviated on its normal orbit and upset the movement of other neighboring planets and bodies. The course variations allowed debris from the previously destroyed planet, Tiamat, to re-enter the Roche field where it fell to Earth, again causing havoc. Much of this effluence was salt water from the once vast oceans of Tiamat, thus causing the second deluge of prehistory. These global cataclysms caused the polar axis to alter, resulting in the Great Pole Shift that destroyed almost all the flora and fauna on the planet. This event is universally recorded and is now scientifically confirmed. See When the Earth Nearly Died. The warlocks of Atlantis, who were never many to begin with, suffered heavy losses in the destruction of their continent, Atlantis. It can be conjectured that there were less than 100 of these totally alien beings left, though there is little to no certainty about this. They also lost most of their sophisticated alien technology. And the sons of the serpents together with their Adamic wards suffered enormous casualties also. It may be conjectured that there were only about 1,000 true sons of the serpents left in existence. This global war and its devastation also meant that the Earth would now have a different climate, equator, and continental placement. The great continents of Appalachia, Oceania, Tyrrhenia, Beringia, and Fennoscandia sank beneath the waves, as did smaller islands such as Lachlan, Leonis, Ibersil and Avalon, to mention a few. The great Miocene Ocean that occupied most of what is today Russia had entirely emptied its basin. Its waters became the Mediterranean and the Caspian and Black Seas. The waters of the planet Tiamat, after pouring into our atmosphere, helped to submerge the continents and eventually became the great oceans we have today. And so, the great pre-Diluvian civilizations once occupying these continents were gone forever. The pillars of heaven were broken, the earth shook to its foundations, the heavens sunk lower towards the north, the sun, the moon and the stars changed their motions, the earth fell to pieces, and the waters enclosed within its bosom burst forth with violence and overflowed it. The grand harmony of nature was disturbed. From Astronomical Revelations by Larry Brian Radka. The Quiche Indians of Guatemala recorded this event as follows: the waters were agitated by the will of Huracan, the heart of heaven, and a great inundation came. Masses of sticky material fell. The face of heaven was obscured and a heavy darkening rain began. There was a great noise above, as if by fire. Now men were seen running, pushing each other, filled with despair. And, the Bible in its customary oblique and disheveled manner, records it thus: the earth is utterly broken down. Moved exceedingly. Book of Isaiah, for this they are willingly ignorant of. The world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. 2 Peter 3:5. Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. Isaiah 24. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. John 21:22. The Laplanders of northern Sweden preserved these accounts. Their ancient books have God saying, I shall reverse the world. I shall bid the rivers flow upward, I shall cause the sea to gather together itself up into a huge towering wall, which I shall hurl upon your wicked earth children, and thus destroy them and all life. From maverick catastrophist and researcher Comans Beaumont, we read, the flood, to the world generally a vague and nebulous tradition, really conceals the most appalling visitation, and its ravages in the British Isles and Scandinavian lands may be retraced to more considerable extent by the effects of what geologists term the drift age. It was no mere ice drift. It was sudden and terribly swift and violent. It took several hundred years for any sense of normalcy to return. These events are still etched in the human race memory, in our very DNA. Man's various nightmare fears and daytime phobias arise from such physiological experiences in the ancient past. Fear of thunder and lightning, of the dark, of water, of caves and enclosures, of loneliness or spiders, insects and other creatures, fear of the ocean, of silence, of strange peoples, and so on, come from this. The myriad omens and superstitions, found in every clime, have their roots in these collective experiences. Julian James, author of The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, claimed that this period thousands of years ago was a time of intense psychosis for the emerging human race. Jack Beringer, Past Shock. The coming of the original serpent race was probably around 50,000 years ago, but could have been as recently as 30,000 years ago. Genetic experiments and hybridization took place some time after the building of Atlantis, for which the services of Neanderthal man seems to have been required. The Wars of the Gods probably began around 13,000 years ago, with the pole shift following soon after. The Earth attains a semblance of normalcy as the centuries pass. Later the historical period commences, post 11,000 years. In the historical or post-Diluvian epoch, humankind seems a strange mixture of primitivism and advancement. All the incredible inventions with no seemingly antecedent stages of development. After the war, the remaining sons of the serpents decided that in order to survive as well as avoid direct attacks from their enemies, they would disperse in smaller contingents to the corners of the earth. With them would go the remaining members of the Adamic race. So, in history, we hear of the coming of civilization to the various provinces of the earth. As the historians and mythologists have known, these sundry cultures and their beliefs bear curious yet undeniable similarities, mainly because contingents of the same people were spreading the knowledge to these different locales, same people, similar paradigms and symbolism. Commensurate with this comes the ambiguous symbols of the snake, the serpent, and the dragon. Prehistoric art. These symbols have been both revered and feared for millennia by almost every culture on the globe, and yet, outside the folk traditions themselves, there is no credible theory to account for why that should be. Are there not a myriad other things worth worshipping? Why is it that so few scholars have dealt with this anomaly? Another interesting anomaly of these cultures is the use of the letter and phonetic sound K, see also C and CH. Almost all the names of the tribes of the North American native Indians have the K sound or letter, for example, Oklahoma, Muskegon, Choctaw, Nakota, Dakota, Cherokee, Mohawk, Yaqui, Comanche, Chickasaw, Seneca, Iroquois. The word America has the strong K sound, as do the words Celt, Cain, Con, Jam, Con, Cohen, Canaan, Con, Karn, Clan, Kieran, Karen, and Christ. There are many personal names that also have it. As the sons of the serpents were dispersing, the original serpent race began converging in the equatorial regions of Mesopotamia and in Asia Minor. These were the areas that now could support life all year round. It is these dark ones who established what are known as the Sumerian and Babylonian civilizations, as well as all the high-profile empires to come. And it is upon the foundations of these dynasties and cultures that the post-Diluvian or historical periods rest. The horrendous events that are associated with these belligerent nations aptly testify to who was behind them. And since it was these brotherhoods that began recording history, they commissioned the accounts to be composed in their favor, to be biased toward their deeds and agenda. Their aristocratic scions were to be history's main dramatis personae. As a result of their bias, the date of their arrival was artificially pushed back to over 400,000 years. This was a political move to give their line ancestral supremacy. The biographies of the gods and the details of past events were also embellished and distorted, while the facts pertaining to the happenings in the Garden of Eden were doctored to the absurd form that exists today. These stories are said to come out of Asia Minor, but they actually refer to events that happened many millennia prior to the dates proffered. Professor W. B. Emery writes in Archaic Egypt, at approximately 3,400 years BC a great change took place in Egypt and the country passed rapidly from a state of advanced Neolithic culture to two well-organized monarchies. At the same time writing appears, monumental architecture and the arts and crafts developed to an astonishing degree. There appears to be little or no background to these fundamental developments. Chapter 9 Reptilians, Priestesses, and Strange Genes. The Atlanteans did not let go of their hatred toward their enemies. Periodically, they continued seeking them in hope of exacting vengeance. They also continued their genetic experiments. However, this had to be done in a more limited manner because their technical hardware had been largely destroyed in the wars. They also studied why things had gone so wrong for themselves since their arrival and first experiments. They decided that their main error was the experimentation on Homo sapiens, also Erectus, Cro-Magnon, etc. For it was certainly that which brought them problems. But humans were not the only life forms on the Earth. So, it was decided that experiments would be made on animal DNA instead. They began looking to the fauna, making genetic tests on certain animals. It was found that the DNA of the reptiles was the most suitable for their purposes. The alien masters then crossed their own DNA with that of certain reptiles, and it is from this that the reptilian dragon, beings of the storybooks, were born. And on earth shall be monsters, a generation of dragons of men and likewise of serpents. Clement, apocalyptic fragment. In the Babylonian legend of creation, we read, men with bodies of birds of the deserts, human beings with the faces of ravens, these the gods created, and in the earth the gods created for them a dwelling. In the midst of the earth. They grew up and became great, and increased in number. Atlantis researcher Andrew Collins provides the story of Amram, father of the lawgiver Moses, who had a personal encounter with such beings or their masters. I saw watchers in my vision, the dream vision. Two men were fighting over me, saying, and holding a great contest over me. I asked them, who are you, that you are thus empowered over me? They answered me, we have been empowered and rule over all mankind. They said to me, which of us do you choose to rule you? I raised my eyes and looked. One of them was terrifying in his appearance, like a serpent, his cloak many-colored yet very dark. And I looked again, and in his appearance, his visage like a viper, and wearing exceedingly, and all his eyes. The reptilians did indeed serve their masters well. They were part alien, part reptile, with no human DNA at all. Some, like their creators, looked entirely humanoid. Others were distinctly reptoid. They operated from the limbic mode of consciousness and possessed the physical endurance and strength, not to mention the guile, of the humble earth reptile. From these beings, we inherit the term cold-blooded evil. Zeus and Typhon the reptilians preferred to live beneath the ground or in dark caverns, their needs being seen to by other genetic mutants or even by compliant atoms who still remained in the ignorant state. They periodically demanded live sacrifices to be made to them and would go in search of the enemies of their masters. Some of these genetic creations had wings, others were polymorphic. So, we have it contained and recited in most of the myths that the archetypal hero comes into conflict with a beast, a great serpent, or hybrid demon. Their combat is the staple method of proving prowess. It became a custom that when a prospective hero did overcome one of the dragons, that they would wear the symbol of the serpent on their heraldic shield or banner in the same manner as the native Indians collected and wore human scalps. The hero was then also considered blooded. Many of the demeaning hazing rituals of so-called upperclassmen are throwbacks to this concept. When the moral sons of the serpents and their diasporas came upon a welcoming tribe or a suitable place to reside, they set up their base. It is from these regions that we find traces of great advancement, amid later primitivism. At these new locations, the sons of the serpent would also continue their genetic studies and work. They had fixed the Adamic people so that they would be intelligent and creative. They also made it possible for the Eves to reproduce sexually. This was primarily to pacify the normal urges of the now freed male Adams. And it is known that members of the sons of the serpent would mate with the Eves, producing exceptional progeny.